Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Jim Dao, editorial page editor. I recently made a trip into Somerville to America's first Jewish tavern and house of learning. It's called Lehrhaus.
We're trying to tell a broad story about Jewish identity here and focusing on all the diversity of the Jewish global community.
That's the man I was coming to see, Josh Foer, the co-founder of Lehrhaus. The restaurant's cuisine pulls from India, Morocco, Iraq, and yes, some from Eastern Europe.
We're playing with, 4,000 years of culinary tradition, so there's a lot of room to play.
The current menu includes vegan pastrami, mac and cheese kugel, and chakla bakla, pickles made by Indian Jews who originated in Iraq. The whole idea of Lehrhaus is that Jewish learning doesn't have to be a dusty, serious task. It can be modern. On the wall are clipboards, each with a question from the Talmud. They come in pairs. You're supposed to do it with a friend.
This is Rav Yehuda Nasiya and the rabbis disagreed. One says the character of a generation parallels that of its leader, and the other says the character of a leader parallels that of their generation. What's the issue of disagreement? Okay, so here's like a little weird bit of Talmud that if you start digging into it, becomes an opportunity to talk about, Trump, I guess.
My favorite thing on the wall is a flashy sign that quotes the great Rabbi Maimonides. It says, "Teach your tongue to say I don't know."
Both intellectual humility, but also maybe a little culinary humility too.
I actually wasn't here to talk to Josh about Jewish learning per se. I wanted to have a broader conversation. If there's one thing to know about Josh, he wants to learn everything. Tying his projects together is an endless curiosity about our world. He's a co-founder of the travel guide company Atlas Obscura, which started in 2009. They put out books, articles, and travel guides about the weirdest corners of the world. His latest book is Atlas Obscura Wildlife, an explorer's guide to the world's living wonders. I asked Josh about why he started the company and what it's all about.
So Atlas Obscura is a company that has a mission, which is to inspire a sense of wonder and curiosity about this incredible planet that we all briefly get to share. And it began, as you said, back in 2009. My co-founder and friend, Dylan Thuris, and I got together and said, when we're out traveling around the world, or mostly actually in our own backyards, it's really hard to find the cool, wondrous, amazing places that you need somebody in the know to tell you about. What if we created a website where people could share their knowledge of all of the most incredible places in the world? A community attached itself to what we were building, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew and turned into what is now decent-sized company whose goal is to inspire wonder. And we take people all over the world on trips to go to places that either you would never think to go to. One of our most popular trips is to the Gates of Hell in Turkmenistan, which is a giant flaming industrial accident in the middle of the Turkmenistan desert. And you'd think, who would want to go to that? Atlas Obscura people would want to go to that. So we either do trips like that, or we take you to a place that you think you know, like Paris, and have you experience it in a totally different way. We're going to do Paris only using our sense of smell and tell the whole story of Paris using just our noses. And now we've got a new book called Wildlife.
Well, let's talk about wildlife for a second. So it's got hundreds of descriptions and photographs of fantastical animals, plants, and natural wonders. There are exploding ants, ancient zombie viruses, a fish that lives in the hottest place in the earth, which is Death Valley. How did you find all these things? And then tell us which ones are your favorites.
Okay, so we wanted to turn our lens, our sense of wonder and curiosity on the natural world. It seemed obvious that we should do that. And it was, once we decided we were going to do that, it was obvious that the person we needed to work with to helm this project is a science journalist named Kara Jaimo, who has been a reporter for Atlas Obscura for many years. Kara went and recruited scientists, science journalists, science communicators, literally on all 7 continents. I mean, we have entries that were penned in Antarctica in this book. Curated them, brought them together. We did a lot of editing. Kara did quite a bit of writing as well, and created what we kind of hope will be like the definitive bestiary of all of the world's craziest, most interesting creatures that hopefully you haven't heard of before, or that you've heard of, but then when you read a little bit about them, you're like, holy cow, I can't believe that there's this thing on planet Earth with me right now that does that. So you ask me, like, what's my favorite? That would be a very hard question to answer. I will tell you that I was reading this book to my children the other day, and they're very excited about this, not only because my name is on the cover, but because this is a book that has lots of like poop and butts in it. They were quite taken with a scorpion that I was telling them about recently called the Ananteris scorpion. What is unique about the Ananteris scorpion is that when it is grabbed or under threat, it will shed its tail. And unlike other species that can regrow a piece of their body that they've shed, the Ananteris scorpion does not regrow its tail, which means that its butt, and here's where my kids get really giggly, its butt seals up, okay? Its butt closes up, which means that it becomes permanently constipated. And the question is, why? Why would an animal let this happen to itself? Why would you become permanently constipated? And the answer is the Ananteris scorpion can survive for up to a year in this state, which is long enough for it to reproduce. And so there was an evolutionary advantage to, shedding your tail, shedding your butt, and making do. And you say, wow, okay, like my understanding of the world's a little bit richer. And my kids have certainly appreciated the opportunity to tell their friends about that.
I thought the moral of that story was going to be evolution actually got it wrong, but apparently
evolution
not.
Almost never gets it wrong. Oh no, actually, I can tell you some stories about evolution getting it wrong. We've got some of those stories in this book as well.
So I think you earlier referred to, I believe you said it, an Atlas Obscura person.
Mm-hmm.
What is that person? How would you describe that person?
So it's interesting. It's less of a demographic than a psychographic. It is somebody who is curious about the world and says, like, I think part of my role here as a human being is to like feel a sense of wonder about the planet and the world and all the incredible people in it and the incredible creatures in it and the incredible places in it. And we're trying to create a home for people who want to look at the world with that sense of wonder and kind of like evangelize a little bit that this is a cool way to go about living a life is being curious. And we think the world could use a little more of that right now.
With a lot of environmental journalism and TV projects, there's always the question of how much do we focus on the impact of people and climate change on species survival. How do you think about the question of human impact on nature and wildlife? Do you want people to be thinking about human impact on the planet while reading your book, sort of versus just having fun and with the weird amazingness of the world?
Well, the weird amazingness of it is completely intertwined with the story of our impact on the world, which is profound. You can publish a million op-eds about climate change and about what we're doing to the environment, and it doesn't necessarily move people. I think we believe that the way you move people is by making them feel a sense of wonder. And if you can get people curious about the world, they will start caring about the world. And if they can feel a sense of awe at how awesome this planet is and its creatures are, like they will feel more compelled to want to protect them. I will say that climate change is like absolutely interwoven with just about not every, but quite a few of the species stories that we're telling here. And a lot of the most incredible, most awesome creatures and flora on the planet are endangered and at risk of disappearing. So the more we care about them, the less likely it is that they will disappear.
Sort of along those lines, I was fascinated by the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which for listeners is this huge area surrounding the now shuttered Soviet nuclear reactor that was the site of the worst nuclear accident in history. And the area now, as your book explains, is teeming with wildlife, despite, I guess, the radioactive contamination. And the reason for that, you point out, is basically because there's no humans there anymore. So what do you take away from that? Like, I weirdly felt like an odd sense of hope all of a sudden, like we could totally contaminate a place and it comes back to life.
Yeah, so Atlas Obscura used to run trips to the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. We don't anymore for a variety of reasons, but they were fascinating. And wherever you have demilitarized zones, by the way, the border between North and South Korea is also an incredible biologically diverse ecosystem because there are no people there. And yeah, it does give you a little bit of hope that if we can just stop screwing it up here, like things will bounce back, but they won't bounce back if they're extinct. And that's part of the reason we got to be so attentive to what we are losing that will never come back.
There is a chapter of the book that focuses on cities. We don't think of cities as being places brimming with strange or natural phenomena. And you yourself live in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is fairly urban. How did writing this book change the way you walk around the city? And are you noticing things you didn't notice before?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll tell you where I have started to notice something that came directly from this book. It's not in Brookline, but in New York on the subway the other day, where I encountered a mosquito, which I had never thought twice about before this book, that like, yes, there are mosquitoes above ground, there are mosquitoes below ground. Actually, the mosquitoes that live in subway tunnels are probably not a unique species, but a unique subspecies of common mosquitoes that evolved particularly to thrive in the underground, particularly in subway tunnels. So they're known as actually the London Tube mosquitoes, and they became kind of famous during World War II when Londoners were going underground to, stay out of the way of the V2s. And they would complain about getting bitten by these mosquitoes. It turns out the mosquitoes that live underground in the London Tube are the same ones that are now all over the world and in the New York subway system, and probably also in the Boston T system, have different, occupy a different ecological niche. So above ground, mosquitoes feed on, well, not just humans, but birds especially. Underground, you don't have birds. So these mosquitoes are adapted to eat not just humans, but also rats, or feed on rats. And it's a different ecological niche that they've evolved into. And here they are, in our cities.
More of my conversation with Josh Foer after a short break. I was thinking about this. In a way, your family could be an entry in Atlas Obscura. Not because you're weird, but you're not, but because of the way your siblings are sort of like preternaturally accomplished in amazing ways. So Franklin, the oldest.
That's where I met you at Frank's book party.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's been a prominent magazine editor and writer, and recently published a biography of Joe Biden. Jonathan, the middle brother, is an acclaimed novelist. And now you are not only the creator of these super popular wildlife books, but now a restaurateur as well. So talk a moment about growing up in a family like that, and what was it like trying to follow those acts as the youngest?
I wish I could tell you that there was something like interesting or like funny or odd about my family growing up. And by the way, my mother would be very pleased with your description of us as preternaturally not weird, or whatever it was that you said.
Accomplished is the word.
Well, she'd be more interested in the preternaturally not weird, probably. Like, we had a boring childhood. We ate a lot of sugar cereal and watched a lot of TV. And
but your mother was a writer. Your dad was a lawyer.
And they're wonderful parents. And you should be so lucky to meet them one day. They're wonderful people and loving, wonderful people. I think we were very lucky to have a matriarch in the family who was my grandmother was just like a super heroic human being who was a Holocaust survivor, came to America, lost her husband, like ran a grocery store, and was just one of these just incredible immigrant like heroes who persevered through the worst things you could possibly imagine and invested every bit of like love and everything in her grandchildren, in her children, but really in her grandchildren. And we grew up like around her table and truly in her shadow as a human being. So if anything, that's not to like take any credit away from my parents, who are wonderful, but my grandmother was a towering figure.
So we're sitting here in Lehrhaus, which is a tavern you created to be a place of Jewish thought as well as food. Talk a minute about your relationship to your own Jewish identity.
Well, it's grown, changed over time, as probably it should. And for me, this was a place that I started with Charlie Schwartz, who's my co-founder, and we wanted to create the kind of space that we felt was lacking in our Jewish lives, which is a place that would be like warm and accessible and delicious, and a kind of communal space that would be grounded in learning, in this like ancient Jewish practice of trying to make sense of ourselves and of the world and of what we're all doing through engaging with text and like trying to interpret, and which is sort of like the essential Jewish act. So we want to take that and make it feel like something that was accessible to anyone.
So we're surrounded by historical photos of famous and important Jews and amazing books by Jews or about Judaism. How does your Jewish identity interact with your identity as a writer and also as a business owner?
Well, I think the common thread is curiosity. And I think everything I've been involved with as a journalist and as through Atlas Obscura, it's all about like pursuing curiosity. And you can be curious about everything that's out there. And you can also be curious about like what's inside and where, and also like your history and where you come from and where you're going. And I think that is probably the thing that ties like my work as a journalist to creating a place like this.
It's not lost on me that we're in one of the most fraught times for Jewish Americans in memory, really. October 7th, the brutal war between Israel and Hamas has caused a lot of conflict among Jewish Americans, as well as among liberals, over Israel and the fate of Palestine, many huge, difficult questions. How have you tried to navigate those conflicts? And do you see Lehrhaus as a place where people should come to debate those kinds of issues?
It's an interesting question because so we're really a mashup of two ancient institutions here at Lehrhaus. One is a tavern, because it turns out actually Jews ran a lot of the taverns in the Pale of Settlement in the, right up until the 20th century. And the Beit Midrash, the House of Learning, which is a uniquely Jewish institution that, in a way, is like the central Jewish institution, even more than the synagogue, I would say, historically. The synagogue is where you go to pray. The Beit Midrash is where you go to debate, to engage with ideas, to disagree, sometimes loudly disagree. And this is trying to bring those two traditions together into one space and create a place that is like really for everyone, for non-Jews as well. And on any given night, probably a quarter of the people who are here are not Jewish. So at a moment when, it's like real, it's fraught. It's like every Jewish person I know feels like they're walking on a tightrope right now. And this tries to be a place that both embraces our tradition of disagreement, but like agreeable disagreement. Like it's always, the Jewish tradition has this idea of argument for the sake of heaven. That any argument that's for the sake of heaven is a good thing. Now, what do we mean by heaven? Forget about that, because like Jews don't know what the hell we're talking about when we talk about heaven. What they mean is like an argument that's like for the greater good. And that is, if you're having an argument for the greater good, that's a good argument. And this tries to be a place that says, come one, come all. And like, here's a place where you can exhale a little bit, because I think a lot of Jews like feel like they're holding their breath kind of all the time. And this is a place where they can walk in and like feel like, whew. But also a place where you can exhale and like talk. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about now. There's always a lot to talk about. And so we're trying to create the space for that.
Josh Foer is a lot of things. He's an author, and his new book is Atlas Obscura Wildlife. He's a co-founder of the Atlas Obscura Company, and he's the creator of the Lehrhaus Tavern in Somerville. Thanks so much, Josh, for hosting me here and talking.
Thank you.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Jim Dao. Thanks for listening.